They took the wrong Apache woman. At dawn, a legendary gunslinger was already at the fence. The desert was quiet and still, the kind of silence that felt heavy on the chest. The night had wrapped the small Apache village in darkness, and only the faint glow of the moon reflected on the dusty ground. Families were asleep in their homes, the children curled under blankets, and the elders whispering soft prayers. Everything seemed peaceful, but the calm was fragile, almost as if the land itself was holding its breath. Among the villagers, a young Apache woman named Nayeli walked quietly near the edge of the village. She had long, dark hair that shone faintly under the moonlight, and eyes that reflected both fire and wisdom. From a young age, she had learned the ways of her people, how to move silently through the desert, how to read the stars, and how to be brave even when fear threatened to take over. Tonight, like every other night, she watched over the village, her hands instinctively tightening around the small tools she carried, ready to help if danger came. Far from the village, a group of soldiers moved through the desert like shadows. They had come from the east, riding fast and low, hoping to strike before the sun rose. They were armed and dangerous, men who had faced many battles and carried no mercy. Their leader had heard stories of the Apache raids and the stubbornness of the people who lived in these lands. His orders were simple: capture anyone they could, especially those who might give them leverage over the tribes. The soldiers approached the village carefully, thinking themselves clever, but they did not know the land as well as the villagers did. The desert, with its uneven rocks and hidden valleys, belonged to the Apache. Every footstep was familiar to Nayeli, and she could sense when the wind carried the sound of horses coming from afar. Breath. She felt it first, a vibration in the ground, almost like a warning. At first, she tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind, but then she saw shadows moving in the distance. Psst. Her heart pounded as she realized what it was. Soldiers. They were coming straight for the village. She ran to the elder's home, whispering urgently, "They are here. We must protect our people." The elders rose quickly, though fear lingered in their eyes. They had lived through attacks before, but each time was different. Each time a reminder of the constant danger in these lands. They began to gather the children and women, guiding them to hidden paths that led out of the village. Nayeli helped where she could, leading young ones by the hand and keeping their faces calm despite the panic she felt inside. But the soldiers were fast and determined. They had already surrounded the village from several directions, cutting off the main escape routes. The villagers could hear the clatter of horseshoes against the rocky ground, the harsh voices of the soldiers shouting orders. Nayeli knew that running was not an option for everyone. Many of the elders and children would not survive the chaos. She had to think quickly. The soldiers reached the first homes, breaking through doors and rounding up anyone they found. Nayeli watched from behind a large rock, her mind racing. She could see them taking people, their faces hard and unyielding, their hands gripping ropes and weapons. She felt a surge of anger and helplessness. These men did not understand what it meant to take someone from their home, to steal their freedom and their safety. And yet, there was nothing she could do alone. Then she saw them, her sister among the captives, struggling against a soldier who tried to pull her forward. Nayeli's heart sank. She had to act, but how could one young woman stop such a group? She took a deep breath and remembered the stories her father had told her as a child, stories of courage and strategy. Breaths. Sometimes the greatest victories came not from strength alone, but from careful planning, from patience and timing. She ran to the edge of the village where a small fence marked the boundary between safety and danger. She peered over, counting the soldiers, studying their movements. There were too many to fight directly. Nayeli realized that if she wanted to survive and help her people, she needed to wait for the right moment, to use her knowledge of the land to her advantage.
As dawn approached, the first light touched the horizon, turning the sky into soft shades of pink and gold.
The soldiers, thinking their raid had been successful, gathered their captives, and began to move away from the village. Nayeli stayed hidden, watching every step, every gesture. But she knew that once they were on the open path, they would be easier to track. But even so, she could not do this alone. She thought of the stories of the legendary gunslinger, a man who had once roamed these lands, protecting the innocent and punishing the cruel. People said he appeared out of nowhere, swift and deadly, always at the right moment. Nayeli wondered if he was real or just a tale to inspire hope. Her mind raced with fear and determination. The soldiers rode faster, thinking the village would be quiet for the rest of the day. But Nayeli would not let her people suffer without resistance. She ran silently, keeping to the shadows, following at a distance, careful not to reveal her presence. Every step brought her closer to the captives and closer to the hope that someone would arrive to help them. By the time the sun broke fully over the horizon, the desert was bathed in light, but the village was still trembling from the attack. The soldiers were now just figures in the distance, unaware that their actions had already set something much larger in motion. Nayeli's eyes scanned the horizon again, and for the first time she saw a lone figure on horseback, moving swiftly and confidently toward the soldiers. Even from a distance, there was something about him, calm, focused, and unstoppable. She realized with a surge of relief and awe that this must be the gunslinger, the man of legend, the one who could turn the tide. For the first time since the attack began, Nayeli felt a spark of hope. The fight was not over, and danger was still close, but she knew that help had arrived. The rest of the village, hidden and watching, felt it too, a reminder that courage, skill, and the right timing could change everything. And in that moment, as the desert stretched out in every direction and the sun rose higher in the sky, Nayeli made a silent vow. She would survive, she would fight, and she would honor the strength of her people no matter what came next. As the wind swept across the open desert, carrying dust and the faint sounds of horses, Nayeli stayed crouched behind the rocks, her heart beating fast but steady. The capture of the village had been terrifying, but it had also awakened something deep inside her. She had faced fear and still found the courage to act. She had witnessed the strength of her people and the cruelty of their enemies. And now, as the legendary gunslinger approached, she realized that the story of this day, of their courage and their fight, was only beginning. Even in the quiet moments between fear and action, Nayeli felt the weight of responsibility. She had seen the wrong they had done, and she knew that justice would not come from waiting alone. The soldiers had underestimated the village, underestimated her, underestimated the power of courage combined with hope. And though she was only one woman among many, she understood that sometimes one determined heart could change everything. The sun climbed higher and the shadows shortened, but the promise of action remained. Nayeli knew the day would be long, and the dangers were far from over. Yet, for the first time since the soldiers arrived, she allowed herself a small, quiet smile. They had taken the wrong Apache woman. They had awakened the spirit of someone who would not be broken. And somewhere on the horizon, the gunslinger's horse carried him closer to the unfolding story, ready to confront the wrongs that had been done. And so, as the village trembled but did not fall, as the desert held its breath, and as the dawn light spread across the land, the stage was set for a confrontation that would become legend. Nayeli's courage, the soldier's recklessness, and the gunslinger's skill would all collide, shaping a tale that would be told for years. The capture had begun the story, but it would not end without resistance, bravery, and the fierce spirit of those who refused to be defeated. The gunslinger had not been in these lands for many years, yet he remembered every twist of the canyon paths, every ridge that could hide a rider, and every stretch of desert where danger could strike. He was known by many names across the territories, but most simply called him a legend, a man who appeared where he was most needed, carrying skill, courage, and an unyielding sense of justice.
At dawn, he felt the weight of his purpose pressing down on him.
He had heard whispers of a village under attack, of captives taken by cruel men who thought fear was enough to break spirits, and he knew better. His horse moved steadily beneath him, each step calculated and quiet, yet strong enough to cross miles without tiring. The desert stretched endlessly, a mix of sand, rock, and scrub, but he had ridden this land so many times before that it felt like an old friend. He scanned the horizon constantly, eyes sharp for any sign of movement. A dust cloud far ahead told him all he needed to know. Soldiers were on the move. Their arrogance made them careless, and the gunslinger intended to use that to his advantage. He remembered the stories the villagers had shared in years past, stories of bravery, resilience, and the relentless spirit of the Apache people. And he remembered the family he had once helped, the people he had protected when others would have turned away. He thought of them now as he rode. He would not fail them again. Something inside him had awakened at the news of the attack. It was not just duty, it was personal. Someone had taken captives from their home, and the gunslinger did not allow injustice to stand. As the sun rose, casting golden light across the desert, he slowed his pace briefly to study the land. From a distance, he could see the tracks of horses, the direction in which they had traveled, and even the rough size of the group moving ahead. His mind worked quickly, forming a plan. This would not be a simple confrontation. The soldiers were armed, experienced, and confident. But confidence could be a trap. Overconfidence made men predictable. He smiled faintly, knowing he would use that to his advantage. Memories of past battles came to him as he rode. He recalled times when a single well-timed action had turned the tide of conflict. He remembered quiet nights in the desert when only the stars and his horse kept him company, and how patience had often been his most powerful weapon. Now, those lessons would serve him again. Every detail mattered: the angle of the sun, the curve of the ridges, the timing of his approach. He was not just riding to a fight, he was preparing for strategy, precision, and the rescue of innocent lives. By mid-morning, he reached a high ridge that overlooked a narrow canyon. From this vantage point, he could see the soldiers clearly, still moving with purpose, but unaware of the danger approaching from the horizon. He observed their behavior carefully. Which of them rode at the front, which of them seemed cautious, and which of them laughed as if nothing in the world could touch them. Every piece of information mattered. The gunslinger made small notes in his mind, planning how he would act once he drew near. He thought about the young Apache woman taken from her home. Her courage had been mentioned in the stories he had heard, and he imagined her holding her head high even in fear. That kind of spirit could not be broken easily, and it reminded him why he fought. The soldiers might have taken captives, but they had not taken their strength. The gunslinger felt a surge of determination. He would reach them before the captives were lost, and he would ensure that justice was served, no matter what it took. As the morning heat began to rise, he adjusted his course slightly, following the path of the soldiers, but using hidden trails that only someone familiar with the land would know. He moved like a shadow, blending into the desert, quiet and unseen. Every bend of the path, every rock and ridge, was an advantage he would use to his benefit. While the soldiers relied on speed and brute force, he relied on knowledge, skill, and the ability to anticipate their moves. Along the way, he encountered signs of life in the desert: small animals, tracks of other travelers, and the occasional distant figure on horseback. He remained alert, for even the smallest detail could become important. One stray rabbit darting across the path reminded him to be patient. It was easy to lose focus in the open desert, and he would not allow that to happen. His mind remained calm, his heart steady, and his eyes sharp. Hours passed, and he continued to close the distance between himself and the captors. The desert seemed endless, yet he never tired. His horse responded to him without hesitation, moving with a rhythm born of years of training and companionship. The gunslinger thought about the coming confrontation. He knew he could not rush in blindly. Timing was everything. If he acted too soon, the captives could be harmed. If he waited too long, they could disappear entirely. His strategy had to be perfect and his movements precise. Finally, he spotted a small rise ahead, behind which the captors were momentarily hidden. He slowed his horse and dismounted quietly, tying the reins and moving forward on foot. The desert sand shifted softly under his boots, and the warm morning air carried the faint sound of the soldiers' voices. He listened carefully, noting the tone and inflection, imagining how each of them might react if suddenly confronted. His plan began to take shape fully in his mind. The gunslinger recalled stories of the young Apache woman's bravery. She had been captured, yes, but she was not helpless. He imagined her moving silently within the group of captives, watching, waiting, and hoping for someone to arrive. That hope was important. It gave him motivation to act quickly. The soldiers had taken the wrong approach. They thought fear would control her, but it would not. That defiance, that fire, was what he respected most. He moved from shadow to shadow, always keeping the captors in sight. Occasionally, he paused to study the landscape, noting possible escape routes for the captives and safe positions for himself. He planned not just for confrontation but for rescue, thinking through every scenario. This was not just a fight. It was a careful orchestration of speed, timing, and skill. Every movement, every breath mattered. By midday, the gunslinger had positioned himself on a small ridge overlooking a wide stretch of desert. From here, he could see the captors clearly as they navigated the terrain, unaware of the figure watching them from above. He felt a strange calm, the kind that comes when a person knows they are ready. The captives were in danger, yes, but the gunslinger trusted in his training, his knowledge, and the element of surprise. He would act with precision, and he would not fail. He thought again of the village, now hidden behind distant ridges, and of the people waiting for hope to arrive. He knew that once he engaged the captors, the desert itself would become a stage for courage, strategy, and skill. The soldiers had assumed they were in control, but they had underestimated both the gunslinger and the spirits of those they had taken. That mistake would cost them. As the sun reached its peak, he prepared for the final approach. He mounted his horse carefully, making sure every step was silent and controlled. His eyes never left the captors, his mind fully aware of every detail. He was not rushing, but neither was he hesitant. Timing was critical, and he had calculated every second of his advance. The desert stretched out before him, open and unforgiving, yet it was an ally. Every ridge and rock, every shadow and valley worked in his favor. The gunslinger knew that soon the confrontation would begin. The soldiers would realize too late that a legend had arrived, that their actions had drawn the attention of someone who would not be stopped. And the young Apache woman, brave and determined, would see that help had finally arrived. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but it was a weight he carried willingly. The lives of the innocent, the honor of the village, and the spirit of courage demanded it. And so, with the sun high in the sky and the desert stretching endlessly ahead, the gunslinger continued his approach. Each step brought him closer to the captives, closer to justice, and closer to the unfolding story that would be remembered for years. The soldiers had taken what they thought was an easy prize, but they had awakened a force that could not be stopped. A legend was at the fence, ready to act, and soon the story of bravery, strategy, and courage would begin to unfold in full. The gunslinger finally found a safe spot behind a cluster of rocks overlooking the captor's path. From here, he could see the small group of soldiers clearly, along with the captives they had taken. The young Apache woman, brave and defiant, walked among them, her hands bound but her head held high. Even in fear, she refused to show weakness. The gunslinger felt a mix of respect and determination. He would not let these men harm her or anyone else. He crouched low, scanning the area. The soldiers were confident, laughing and speaking loudly, assuming the captives were powerless. But the gunslinger knew better. He studied their movements carefully, which ones were alert, which ones were distracted, and which could be taken by surprise. He also noted the terrain, the gentle slope of the hill, the rocks that could hide him, and the dry shrubs that could serve as obstacles or cover. Every detail mattered. He thought about the young woman, imagining her thoughts and emotions. She had been captured unexpectedly, yet her courage had not faltered. That courage was what would guide him now. He knew that the captors had underestimated her and, by extension, underestimated him. He would use that to his advantage. Every plan he made was based on timing, precision, and observation. He would strike at the right moment, and no one would be harmed unnecessarily. Hours passed as he observed and planned. He moved only when necessary, shifting slightly behind the rocks, adjusting his position to get the best view. He listened to the wind, the faint sounds of hooves in the distance, and the voices of the soldiers. Patience was his greatest weapon. He could rush forward, but that would risk the lives of the captives. For desk. He had learned in countless past encounters that waiting, watching, and understanding the enemy often won more battles than sheer speed or strength. He recalled the stories he had heard in his youth, tales of warriors who protected their people with skill and courage. Some were brave, some were clever, but the greatest succeeded because they understood timing. The gunslinger realized that the coming confrontation would be no different. It was not enough to be fast. He had to be smart, and he had to be ready to adapt if the situation changed. The desert could be unpredictable, and the captors could make sudden decisions. The young Apache woman remained calm, though her eyes scanned the surroundings constantly. She had learned to read the land, the wind, and the people around her. She had seen men try to intimidate her before, and she had survived. Her defiance was quiet but powerful, and it strengthened the gunslinger's resolve. He felt a sense of duty and urgency. He could not fail. Her courage deserved protection, and the soldiers would pay for their arrogance. As the morning grew hotter, he noticed that the captors were becoming complacent. Some walked ahead, chatting, while others lagged behind, assuming nothing could threaten them. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He adjusted his stance, taking advantage of the slope and the rocks, ready to descend quietly when the time came. Every move was measured, every breath controlled. He would not give the captors a chance to react before it was too late.
He also considered the landscape in more detail.
A narrow path led down toward a small clearing where the captives were gathered. From his vantage point, he could see how the soldiers had arranged themselves, creating a sense of control that was false. He planned to use that false sense of security against them. A sudden, well-aimed action could disorient them, allowing him to reach the captives without immediate danger. The gunslinger thought about his own past. He had faced men far stronger, faster, and better armed. But he had always relied on observation, patience, and careful timing. The desert had taught him many lessons about survival, about reading people, and about how courage could change the outcome of any situation. He would apply all of them now. The lives of the captives depended on it. He checked his pistols, making sure they were ready. He adjusted his boots and gloves, tested the straps on his horse, and considered the approach from every angle. The soldiers might have been skilled, but they were not prepared for someone who had mastered both the land and the art of timing. He would descend at the perfect moment, taking them by surprise. Even one mistake could endanger the captives, so he had to be precise. Meanwhile, the young Apache woman stayed observant. She noticed the smallest details, aware that someone might come to help. Deep down, she trusted that help was on the way. Her people had always survived because courage and hope walked hand in hand. She did not panic, though fear lingered. She kept her mind focused on possibilities, scanning for openings and looking for opportunities to assist in her own rescue if she could. The gunslinger studied the soldiers one more time, identifying the weak points. Some were distracted by conversation, others by the captives themselves. He calculated which would be easiest to isolate and which movements would cause the least harm. He planned to disarm them first, to create confusion and give the captives a chance to flee safely. Every detail of the plan depended on careful observation, not rash action. As the afternoon sun climbed, the desert heat became more intense. The gunslinger remained hidden, moving quietly and adjusting his position as needed. He felt the sweat on his brow but ignored it. His focus was unwavering. Time seemed both long and short. Long because patience was required. Short because he could feel the moment approaching when everything would have to move quickly. He was ready. He also thought about the possibility of reinforcements for the captors. What if more soldiers appeared unexpectedly? He had contingency plans. The desert offered many advantages for someone who knew it well. Rocks, hills, and hidden paths could be used to escape, to create distance, or to trap the enemy. He memorized every feature, committing each to mind, so that when the moment came, he could act instinctively and decisively. Finally, the gunslinger decided the time was near. The soldiers had walked far enough to believe they were safe. Their guards were relaxed, their focus scattered. The captives were within reach. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility and the certainty of purpose. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the moment where skill, patience, and courage would combine to rescue the innocent and punish the cruel. He signaled quietly to himself, taking stock of every movement. His eyes darted from one soldier to another, assessing reactions, noting positions. He imagined the young Apache woman among them, thinking of how she had been forced to watch helplessly. His resolve strengthened. He would not fail her. He would not fail the village. The soldiers had made a mistake. The wrong Apache woman had been taken, and that mistake would be their undoing. As the gunslinger adjusted his stance, he thought about the larger picture. This was not just about one village or one young woman. It was about justice, about standing up for those who could not defend themselves, about proving that courage and skill could overcome cruelty and arrogance. He had seen too many men believe power alone would win, and he knew better. Preparation, observation, and courage were stronger than brute force alone. He also considered the captives' mindset. They were likely frightened, but hope could arrive in small ways. If they saw a sign, a figure moving with confidence and purpose, it could inspire them to act, to resist passively until rescue arrived. He understood this dynamic well. The psychological element could be as important as the physical confrontation. As the sun reached its highest point, casting the desert in bright light, the gunslinger prepared to descend from the ridge. He checked the slope, the rocks, and the path. Every movement had been calculated, and now action would follow planning. The captives were in sight, and the soldiers remained unaware of the figure observing them from above. He felt calm, focused, and ready. Finally he moved, sliding carefully down the slope, using rocks for cover. Every step was measured, quiet, and deliberate. He approached the clearing where the captives were held, heart steady but alert. He was not rushing. He was executing a plan honed by years of experience and sharpened by the urgency of the situation. Every breath, every glance, every small movement mattered. The young Apache woman, sensing movement nearby, glanced up. Though she could not see clearly, she felt a shift in the air. a change in energy. Something had arrived, and hope flickered within her chest. She was ready to act when the moment came, even if all she could do was stay calm and alert. Courage was not always loud. It was often quiet, patient, and precise. The gunslinger reached a position close enough to strike. From here, he could begin the confrontation. Every observation he had made would now guide his actions. He knew the soldiers were arrogant, unprepared for what was coming, and he intended to use that. The captive's safety was his first priority, and he would act swiftly and decisively to secure it. In the quiet desert afternoon, with the sun beating down and the wind carrying dust across the land, the gunslinger paused, surveying the scene one last time. The plan was set, the timing was perfect, and the captives were within reach. Soon the story of courage, strategy, and defiance would unfold. The wrong Apache woman had been taken, but she was not alone. Help had arrived. The gunslinger took a deep breath, feeling the desert heat on his face, and moved forward from his hidden position. His eyes never left the captors. Every step he took was careful, deliberate, and silent. Dust rose softly under his boots, but the soldiers remained unaware of the shadow approaching them from the ridge. The sun was high in the sky now, casting sharp light on every detail of the desert, yet he used the brightness to his advantage. The captors could see everything in front of them, but they could not see him. Not yet.
He studied the formation of the soldiers one last time. They were scattered, some walking ahead, some distracted by conversation, and a few lagging behind.
He knew exactly which ones to target first to create confusion. Timing was crucial. He could not afford a single mistake. The captive's safety depended on precision. Slowly he adjusted his stance and prepared to move, each hand holding tight to his pistols, ready for the first sound, the first signal, the first chance to act. The young Apache woman sensed something different in the air. She had been watching the surroundings carefully, alert for any change. Suddenly she noticed a movement at the far edge of the clearing, a shift in shadow, and her heart leapt. She could not see clearly yet, but she felt the presence of someone skilled, someone ready to intervene. Her hope flared, quiet but strong. She glanced at the other captives and signaled them to stay calm. Panic would make them easy targets. They had to remain patient, strong, and observant. With deliberate silence, the gunslinger descended the last slope toward the clearing. He moved with the grace and precision of someone who had faced danger countless times. His boots made almost no sound on the rocky sand.
He paused behind a low ridge, just out of sight, studying the soldiers' reactions.
They still assumed they were in control, still unaware that the moment for rescue had arrived. The gunslinger smiled faintly. Arrogance was their greatest weakness. Then, with a sudden controlled burst of speed, he moved into the open. A shot rang out, precise and loud. The nearest soldier went down instantly, the bullet hitting the weapon he held. Chaos erupted. The remaining captors spun around, confusion and fear flashing across their faces. The gunslinger's movements were swift, calculated, and unstoppable. Each shot was aimed carefully to disable, not to harm, the captives. The soldiers had underestimated him, and now they paid the price for their mistake. The young Apache woman saw the opportunity she had been waiting for. With courage and quick thinking, she helped the other captives move behind rocks and cover. Even though her hands were still bound, she used her wits to create small distractions, throwing rocks and shifting debris to mislead the captors.
Her bravery was quiet but powerful.
The gunslinger noticed her actions and nodded slightly, recognizing her courage and determination. Together, their coordinated effort began to turn the tide. Her packets, now panicked, tried to regroup. Some drew weapons, shouting and firing, but the gunslinger moved like a shadow, dodging, advancing, and disabling them with precision. Each movement was carefully planned, every step part of a larger strategy. Dust rose in the air, mixing with the sound of gunfire and shouted orders. The captives stayed close to the cover the young woman had found, hearts pounding but spirits alive. They had witnessed skill and bravery, and that sight strengthened their hope. One soldier tried to flank the gunslinger from the left, but he anticipated the move. A quick turn, a precise shot, and the man dropped his weapon, stunned but unharmed. Another soldier attempted to charge, thinking brute force would win the day, but he was quickly subdued. Every action of the gunslinger was measured, ensuring that none of the captives were harmed. The desert had become a theater of strategy, courage, and skill, where one man's experience met another's determination and spirit. The young woman continued to help the captives, guiding them carefully and silently. Breath. She had studied the soldiers' weaknesses, noticed their overconfidence, and used it to their advantage. The captives followed her lead, moving as quietly and carefully as possible. The gunslinger covered their progress, taking out any threats before they could react. Together they formed an unspoken alliance, moving with precision and focus, driven by courage and the will to survive. Day. As the confrontation continued, more captors attempted to resist, but their confidence was gone. The first wave of soldiers had been subdued, and the chaos left the rest disorganized. The gunslinger moved swiftly, disabling weapons, using his surroundings to create obstacles, and forcing the captors into positions where they could not fight effectively. Each action was deliberate, ensuring the safety of the captives while controlling the battlefield with skill and efficiency. The young Apache woman finally found a chance to untie her own hands using a small rock she had hidden. Once free, she moved quickly to help the others. Her courage, intelligence, and quick thinking had been crucial to the rescue. The gunslinger noticed her actions and gave a brief nod of approval. Together, they were turning what seemed impossible into success. The captors, now facing skilled opposition and an unexpected alliance, began to lose hope. With the soldiers distracted, the gunslinger guided the captives toward a safer area, breath scanning constantly, ready for any sudden threats. Dust and smoke from the disrupted desert environment swirled around them, but his focus never wavered. Breath. Every step was calculated, every glance purposeful. The captives felt the safety and confidence of someone who had mastered the desert, someone who understood both strategy and courage. One soldier, desperate and reckless, attempted to attack from behind. The gunslinger anticipated the move, intercepting him swiftly and subduing him without injury. Another tried to escape, only to be blocked by the gunslinger's positioning and careful timing. The young woman assisted by creating distractions, throwing small rocks and guiding captives into cover. Their teamwork was seamless, unspoken, and effective. The captives began to feel a sense of hope that they had not experienced since being taken. They could see that the gunslinger was in control, that the soldiers' arrogance had been undone, and that escape was possible. The young woman's courage inspired them, reminding them of their own strength and resilience. Even in the middle of chaos, they found the will to act carefully and wisely. Finally, after careful coordination, the group reached a natural cover point, a narrow gorge that led towards safer terrain. The gunslinger checked the area, ensuring no remaining threat. The captives moved quickly, staying low and close together. The young woman guided them through the rocks, helping anyone who stumbled, encouraging them with quiet words. The desert, once dangerous and threatening, now seemed to offer protection for those who knew how to use it. The remaining captors, seeing their plan completely undone, attempted one last desperate charge.
The gunslinger was ready.
With calm precision, he disarmed and subdued them, ensuring they could no longer threaten the captives. Each move was calculated, every action part of the larger goal: safety for the innocent. The captors were defeated, not through recklessness, but through skill, patience, and strategy. With the immediate danger gone, the gunslinger and the young woman guided the captives further into the desert, away from the soldiers' path. They moved carefully, staying alert for any signs of pursuit, but the captors had been fully subdued. The captives, now free, expressed quiet gratitude, Their fear had been replaced by relief and admiration for the courage they had witnessed. They had survived not by luck alone, but because of bravery, skill, and determination. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert, the gunslinger paused for a moment, scanning the area one last time. He ensured that the captives were safe, that the soldiers could not follow, and that the path forward was secure. The young woman standing beside him breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the ordeal begin to lift. Her courage had not wavered, and now it had been rewarded with freedom. The desert wind carried the faint sound of the village in the distance. The captives began to understand that they were almost home. Relief and hope filled their hearts, replacing the fear and uncertainty of the past hours. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a combination of skill, strategy, and bravery that had turned an impossible situation into rescue and safety. The gunslinger, quiet and focused, led the way with unwavering determination. The young woman walked beside the captives, helping them navigate the terrain and offering encouragement. Together they moved as a team, a force of courage and intelligence against the arrogance and cruelty of the captors. The desert, once threatening, now seemed to witness their triumph. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the group finally reached a safe vantage point overlooking the valley where the village lay. The captives were free, the danger had passed, and the courage of one man and one brave young woman had changed the course of the day. Their journey back to safety was about to begin, but the story of what had happened, the courage, the planning, and the triumph would be remembered far beyond the desert walls. The group moved steadily across the desert, the setting sun casting long shadows behind them. The captives, now free, walked with cautious relief, their eyes still alert for any lingering danger. The young Apache woman led with quiet confidence, helping the others navigate the uneven terrain and keeping them calm. The gunslinger rode slightly ahead, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit, every muscle alert, every sense attuned to the desert around him. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the weight of what had just happened, and the understanding that the day had changed their lives forever. As they approached the familiar hills that marked the boundary of the village, the captives' pace quickened.
Fear and relief intertwined in their hearts.
They had survived an ordeal that could have ended in disaster, and now the safety of home was within reach. The young woman glanced back at the group, her eyes softening with pride and care. She had led them through danger with courage, strategy, and quiet determination. Her strength had been unwavering, even when the soldiers' presence had seemed overwhelming. The gunslinger remained silent, yet his presence brought comfort. Every step he took, every glance he gave reassured the captives that safety was near. He had acted with precision, skill, and patience, turning what seemed impossible into rescue. The desert, once filled with threats, now witnessed their triumph. The captives could feel the shift in the air, the subtle change that signaled safety and freedom. From the ridge, the village appeared in the distance, nestled among trees and rocky outcrops. Smoke rose from small fires, and the faint sound of voices carried through the air. Word of the soldiers' attack had reached the villagers, and while fear still lingered, hope was returning. Breath. The captives' hearts lifted, their steps becoming lighter, and they began to believe that they would see their families again. The young woman's heart swelled as she saw the familiar shapes of the village. She had feared being taken too far away, feared that her family would not see her again. Yet here they were, approaching the place where her people waited. Relief mixed with lingering tension, for she knew the danger had not entirely passed. The soldiers could have reinforcements, and the desert was unpredictable. But for now, she allowed herself to hope. The gunslinger motioned for the captives to slow as they neared a rocky pass. From his vantage point, he could see the village clearly, and he wanted to ensure that the group entered safely.
He pointed out safe paths, hidden dips, and cover spots, guiding the captives with care.
His knowledge of the terrain and his anticipation of potential threats ensured that they could return without further incident.
Every move was calculated, every instruction meant to preserve life and ensure a peaceful return.
As they crossed the last stretch of open desert, they noticed a small group of villagers waiting at the edge, scanning the horizon. Fear and worry were visible in their faces, but as the group came into view, relief and joy quickly replaced the tension. Mothers clutched their children, elders stood with tears in their eyes, and friends rushed forward to embrace those who had returned. The captives, exhausted but free, were welcomed with warmth and gratitude. The young Apache woman ran the last few steps, her heart pounding with emotion. She embraced her family tightly, feeling the safety and comfort she had longed for during her capture. The villagers listened intently as she shared briefly what had happened, though many details would remain unspoken. The story of courage and defiance had already spread among them, filling hearts with admiration for her bravery and resilience. The gunslinger dismounted and allowed the villagers to approach him. Their gratitude was quiet but profound. They did not need words. They understood what he had done and the skill it had taken. He had not sought reward or recognition. His actions had been driven by a simple principle: protect the innocent and ensure justice. The villagers offered water and food, simple tokens of thanks, but the gunslinger only nodded and allowed himself a small, satisfied smile.
The young woman stood beside him, her eyes filled with pride and respect.
She had survived fear and captivity, guided others to safety, and witnessed the skill and courage of someone legendary. In that moment, she understood that courage was not measured by strength alone, but by intelligence, patience, and the willingness to act when others could not. She had been tested and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident in her own abilities. The villagers began to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Fires were rekindled, homes checked for damage, and children allowed to play under careful watch. Laughter slowly returned to the air, mingling with the warm glow of the setting sun. Though the memory of the soldiers' attack lingered, it was tempered by the knowledge that courage and skill had prevailed. The gunslinger had arrived when needed most, and the young woman had helped ensure the safety of her people. In the quiet moments, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the gunslinger prepared to leave. He knew his presence was temporary, his work here was done. He had intervened at the right time, executed a careful plan, and ensured the captive's safety. As he mounted his horse, he glanced back at the village, at the young woman standing among her people, and felt a sense of completion. The story of today would be remembered, shared, and honored. The young woman watched him leave, a mixture of gratitude and admiration in her eyes. Though he would disappear into the desert once again, his actions had left an indelible mark. The captive's freedom, the safety of the village, and the courage of everyone involved were a testament to the strength of character and the power of timely action. She knew that the desert, the village, and her people had all been shaped by this day. Word of the rescue spread quickly among neighboring villages and settlements. The story of the young Apache woman's courage and the gunslinger's timely intervention became legend. Travelers spoke of it in hushed tones, passing the tale from one settlement to another. It was a story not of violence for its own sake, but of skill, patience, and bravery, overcoming cruelty and arrogance. Parents told it to children, elders recounted it to young warriors, and the young woman herself became a symbol of resilience and hope. In the weeks that followed, life returned to a new normal. The village healed physically and emotionally. The captives, now safe, regained their strength, and the bonds of family and community were reinforced. The young woman continued to inspire others, her courage a quiet reminder that fear could be faced and overcome. The desert, once a place of danger, had witnessed the triumph of skill, patience, and intelligence. The gunslinger, meanwhile, rode silently across the desert, already planning his next journey. His work was never done. There were always people in need, always injustices to confront, yet he carried with him the quiet satisfaction of a day well fought, of lives saved, and of courage rewarded. He had arrived at the fence at dawn, executed a perfect plan, and left behind a story that would be told for generations. For the young Apache woman, life had changed forever. She had faced fear, guided others, and witnessed the actions of a legend. She knew that courage and intelligence could prevail even in the darkest moments. Her people's stories would forever include the day they were almost lost, and the day courage and skill returned them to safety. She had learned that hope, patience, and bravery were powerful allies, and that her own determination could change the outcome of events. As the night fell over the desert, the village gathered to share stories, remember the ordeal, and celebrate their survival. Fires burned warmly, children listened wide-eyed to tales of bravery, and elders spoke of the lessons learned. The story of the young Apache woman and the gunslinger became part of the community's history, a story of resilience, hope, and the enduring power of courage. And so, the legend endured. The wrong Apache woman had been taken, but she was not alone. A gunslinger had arrived at the right moment, combining skill, patience, and courage to ensure justice. The captives were safe, the village intact, and a story of hope and bravery was born. In the desert, in the village, and in the hearts of those who survived, the tale would live on, inspiring generations to come. The young woman stood under the night sky, looking up at the stars, feeling a deep sense of pride and calm. She had faced danger, helped others, and survived. She knew that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. The gunslinger had returned to the horizon, disappearing into the endless desert, but the lesson remained. Even in the darkest moments, skill, patience, and bravery could change everything. And so, life in the village continued, stronger and wiser than before. The desert had tested them, danger had challenged them, and courage had guided them. The story of that day, the young Apache woman and the legendary gunslinger, would never be forgotten. It would be told again and again, a reminder that heroes could appear when least expected, and that even the wrong choices made by the cruel could be overcome by the right actions of the brave.